Hi, this is Patrick from JDM Gems. Today we're going to be working on this 1997 Honda Acty. The work we're going to be doing is installing these coilovers and showing you the step-by-step process of how to put them on and adjust them. So inside the box, there's some stickers, the rear shocks, and I believe the front one is in here. Yep. Rear shocks. And then front. And then a small box of hardware and tools. So 2 adjustment knobs, 2 wrenches, and then I'll unpack the front. Alrighty, let's begin. So the tools that are required are a 17mm long socket, a 19mm long socket, a 12mm, a 14mm long, and a 14mm short, a 19 to take the lugs off, a 3/8 ratchet with extensions, a flathead screwdriver for prying, the supplied coilover adjustment tools, and an impact. So first, I am going to be working on the front left side. I'll start by raising the vehicle. One thing I want to check on the coilover installment is checking the distance from the tire to the coil. On the factory one, you can see with these aftermarket wheels, I can barely get this 3mm spacer in here. So we'll see how farther or closer the coilovers are going to be to give you an idea if you can fit wider wheels or less offset wheels with coilovers over stock suspension. First, I'm going to be removing this 14mm bolt. Next, I'm going to be lifting the passenger seat up and removing these 3 12mm bolts right here. 12mm nuts. On the last one, just hold the suspension up. Okay. Next part, I'm going to be removing this brake line with a 12mm right here. Alright. Next, we're just going to be taking the suspension out of the knuckle. Alright, next we're just going to be removing the top hat from the shock. Okay. Next, we're going to be installing the part we just took off onto the coilover. So now we'll be putting the nut back onto the top of the shock. And just a little bit too shallow of the socket, so I'll be getting a longer 19. Alright. One thing to note before putting the coilover onto the Acty is this coil right here, you just want it to be hand tight. You don't want it to be loose to where the coil is going up and down. Just enough to get some tension onto the spring, but not too much. And then we'll adjust it from there. When putting the coilover in, make sure this dented part lines up with where the bolt is going to be here. For example, when the bolt is in, you'll see it's protruding here. You'll want to line it up with this. Now that we have the coilover in the knuckle, we are just going to tighten these collars. And then we're going to measure the distance from here to, I guess, wherever. You just want to be even on both the front coilovers. So I'll just measure it with something and then I'll repeat it for the other side. So next we're going to try to get the coilover back into the spot. Sometimes the axle will pop out of its socket, so it'll be a little bit tricky to get in, but you'll just keep moving it around until it finds its spot. Just like that. And now once we have it in here, we'll just lift it up and we'll tighten the nuts on top. All right, so now I'm just going to, with one hand, pull up on the suspension, and then with the other hand, apply the nut, and then let go. Alrighty. So one thing I didn't realize is there's no threaded part for the original bolt to thread into, so I found a nut that I'm just going to use on the back side of this bracket to hold down this brake line. Okay, so next I'm going to put the wheel on and just check the distance between the tire on this side to the coil. If it's too close, I'll run these 3mm spacers. So with it on it, I can get my whole hand back here easily, as with the other one I couldn't even get a 3mm spacer in there. So you're definitely going to get more clearance with coilovers over the factory suspension. Alright, next we're just going to pop this cap off and place this dial right into the shock. I'll adjust it later. So now we're off to the driver's side. We're going to start by taking off the wheel. We'll check this out first. For the next part, I'm just going to be removing the driver's seat. There's going to be 4 12mm bolts. Next, we're going to be removing this bolt and then the brake line bracket. So next is these 3 12mm nuts. So next we're going to try to get the shock out. Okay. Now we're going to be removing the nut on the top of the shock. And we'll just be reusing this part. One thing I did want to mention is I got the 250 spring rate spring instead of the default 200 pound spring rate. Now just make sure that you're going to adjust this side the same as you did the other side. So again, just measure the distance from the coil to wherever, and you'll match it to the other side. So I'm doing that now. So now we're going to be ready to put the shock back into place. I'll need a pry bar. It's just a little too tight. Now I'll just be prying the back portion just to slide it in. And then the brake line. Now we're gonna have to fight the axle to go back in place. There it goes. And then we'll just go get the rest from up top. So next I'm gonna pull up on the shock. Next we're gonna put the adjustment cap on top of the coilover. And then I'll just put the dampening all the way to hard and on both sides and then work down from there. I'll probably do 2 turns loose. And I'll see how I like it there. You can always adjust it later on. And I'm gonna do this on both sides. Now I'm gonna be putting the seat back in. Okay, so now I'll just be putting the wheel back on. Okay. So starting off with the back, I supported the frame with jack stands. In the rear beam I have a jack ready. Since we are going to be removing the leaf, we are going to try a different combination to see which ride height I like the most. So we might be taking the middle spring out, which is a popular option. I might be putting the bottom spring on top, or I might be doing a combination of both. So I'm just going to see which setup I like the most. I'll be doing it to both sides. So first I'll start by removing this 14mm bolt on the bottom of the shock. Just like that. Now I'll be removing the 2 bolts holding the shock at the top. There we go. All right. Next, I'll be removing the 4 nuts right here. Okay, so next I'll remove this 12mm right here. So now with all this loosened, I'll just remove this. In order to get the middle leaf out, we're going to have to pry this open. I'll just leave the bottom spring at the bottom for now. I'll just put it back through here. Just like that. And then I'm going to jack up the beam with the jack to put it up against here. This is gonna be tricky pushing this back into here. I think it's gonna go to the bottom. Okay. All right, so now we're just going to tighten this nut. Okay. I just realized inside is marked. So this goes on the inside, so this will go on the outside. Thanks. Okay, there. So next I'll be taking off this bracket and transferring it to the new shock. Alright, now it's ready to be put on the Acty. So while I was trying to install these shocks, I noticed that the original bolt wasn't going through the hole. It was just stopping. So what I did is I just threaded this with the exact same thread as this bolt, and I just stripped the threads. So now this bolt will go through. It was just a little bit too small. I don't know if it was a problem with this one particular shock or if it's a problem everyone's had, but just figured I should mention that. This was OEM bolt, wasn't going through here. So a couple things to note before putting these shocks back in is whenever you install these shock, on mine in particular, I had to install the shock this way with the dial faced towards the back, because if I had it faced this way, the dial was very close to the axle boot, and I was afraid that it was gonna rub on the axle boot, so I had to put it in that way. But I guess it's up to you if you want to take the risk of it potentially rubbing your axle boot. Next, whenever I mounted this up to the Acty, I noticed this part on top of the shock was hitting the frame rail, so I just cut up a little bit. The best way to mount these is going through the top first and then the bottom second. Alright, so now that we got the shock in place and the hole for the bolt matches with the hole in the beam, I just placed the bolt through the hole just enough so I can get an impact on it and thread it. You can see it threaded into the insert just fine. So now I'll put the wheel on and it's done. So this is the height with the bottom spring on top and the middle spring removed. It's about a 2 finger gap between this wheel and the fender. Pretty close. Seems pretty stiff with this setup too. Alright, so with this setup, I have the middle spring on the bottom, the top spring in the middle, and I put the bottom spring on top. So we'll see how it looks like this. So this is how it looks. Bought my whole hand in there. Probably how it's gonna look if it was stock. Again, all we did is I put the bottom spring on top. Probably lowered it like 1/2 inch over stock. So now I'll be showing you the height with the helper spring at the bottom and the regular leaf on top. All I did simply was remove the center leaf, so I'll see how high it is, like this. So this is the Acty with the helper on the bottom, and I simply just removed the center spring. You can see we have about 4 finger lengths here. As the one previous, we had about 5, and it was about what, 2. So this is a good in between. Of course, every car is going to be different, so that's why I'm not using measuring tape. Different wheels, different settings, but just to give you an idea of what setting you think you're going to want in your car, so you're not doing what I'm doing by having to take all the springs out and put them back in, and it just gives you an idea of what you like. So now I'm going to go for a little drive. A couple things I noticed are the suspension is very stiff in the front and the rear, but they're about the same. The suspension setup I have right now is the back has the center leaf removed with the helper spring flipped to the top, and the front are on 250-pound spring rates. Already getting out of the garage with that 1-inch bump, it was very stiff. There is some spring noise. You can hear that. Steering also feels a little bit heavier. So let's see how it drives. Another thing to mention is to tighten the nut on top of the two front shocks as much as you can. I didn't do this the first time around, and I had play in the top hat, and it was making a rattling sound while driving. So some of the problems encountered that I'd like to mention are on the front shock. We get to provide our own hardware to mount the brake line. For the rear shock, the sleeve on the lower portion of the shock was too small to fit the original bolt. So a common fix for that would be to drill out that hole. For me, I just simply tapped it with an M8 tap and then stripped the threads since I didn't have a drill. I'm assuming gas will eventually fix this issue, but this seems to be a common problem. Lastly, on the top of the shock, I had to grind down about 1 millimeter for it to clear the frame on the Acty so I can mount the top of the shock. I also went over 3 different spring settings so that before you start this job, you can kind of choose which spring setting you'd like to go with for the rear so that you're not taking the springs off and putting them on and doing all the work that I had to do because it's a lot. We hope this video helped, and if it did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next repair. Oh. So a couple things to note before putting the excuse me. The work we're going to be doing is installing these GAZ coilovers. Shit, I think it's called gas. Is it gas or GAZ? And an impact.
You said spring?
Oh, it was just for fun.